Okay, let's talk about how to find slope using a formula and some points. Last video I did was just counting slope on a graph. This is basically using a formula to derive slope and some points. Okay, so let's look at that. The slope formula basically is the same. It's rise over run, but now we have kind of a formula to go, a more specific formula to go with it. So m, we know, is the value for slope, equals y2 minus y1 over divided by x2 minus x1. And it's basically the change in the y's divided by the change in the x's. It's still the rise over the run, but now this is, again, a more specific formula. And when I say you're going to use points, I mean those xy coordinates. You're going to be given two sets of coordinates, and I'm going to show you what to do with those coordinates in this formula. The next slide here. Okay, so let's find slope. We're given these 2 points right here. The -4 and 8 is our first xy coordinate, and then we have a 6 and a 6 as our second pair. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to label it. The labeling is really important to get straight. You know this is an x, right? And this is a y. That's pretty simple. This is also an x. And this is also a y. Really simple. This is our first coordinate team, right? And we're going to put a 1 next to these guys. And this is our second pair. So we're going to put a 2 next to these guys. And that's it. You want to keep the 1s together and the 2s together. Sort of get that straight in your head, because I see kids mixing them up a little bit. So as long as you label it correctly, the rest is really simple, because all you're doing at this point is substituting. So just get straight in your head. This is x1, y1. This is x2, y2. Okay, so now we're going to plug these coordinates into our formula. We have y2, which is 6. So let's plug this in. y2, which is 6, minus y1, which is right here, 8, over x2, which is 6, minus, because that's the formula, x1, which is a -4. Okay, so now all we have to do there is solve that equation, and we have our rules that we have to keep in mind, right? So we have 6 minus 8, which is, you know, keep change opposite, right? So we have a -2 on top, over 6 minus a -4. Well, we know this becomes 2 plus signs, and we get -2 over 10. So now we can simplify that. M equals -2 over 10, which is the same as -1 over 5. So our final answer is M equals -1 over 5. That is our slope. And if we were to plug these like coordinates into a graph and graph them, plot them and graph them, we would be able to count up and across and get that same slope. So again, there's 2 different ways of doing it. Sometimes you're given these points, sometimes you're given a graph. You need to know and be comfortable with both ways, okay? So just remember your rules and then simplify to get your slope. Okay, so let's do another one. Same thing, we have 2 coordinates, we have our formula all set up. All we're going to do first is label it. So we have, this is an x, this is a y, this is an x, this is a y. These guys are the 1s, these guys are the 2s. Simple. Okay, so now we're just going to plug it in. 7, well, it's y2 minus y1. So we're going to take the y2, which is a 7, minus y1, which is right over here, a 2, over x2, which is the 5, minus x1, which is the 1. And then we have 7 over 2, which is 5 over 4. And that's it. Our slope, M equals 5 over 4. That would be our final answer. Very, very simple. Okay, so let's do another one. Just want to make sure you're really comfortable with slope, because slope is a really big topic for us. Okay, let's go ahead and label these points again. X, Y, x1, y1, x2, y2. Okay, substitute it in. We have y2 minus y1, so y2 is 3, minus y1, which is 6, over x2, which is 4, minus x1, which is 2. And we have our rules, 3 minus 6, we know that's going to be a negative 3, because we know those rules by now. And 4 minus 2 is just 2. So there you go. Our slope equals negative 3 over 2. That's it. Pretty simple. I wanted to show you also these two side by side because I want you to keep in mind something we discussed earlier, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. Let's do this one first. We have x1, y1, x2, y2. We're going to substitute it into the formula, and equals y2 is a 3, minus y1, which is a 3, over x2, which is a 6, minus x1, which is a 2, and we get a 0 over 4, and the answer to that would of course be 0 divided by 4 would be a 0, because 0 times 4 is 0, right? So if n equals 0, if your slope equals 0, we just simply say that's a 0 slope, right? That's a 0 slope. And if you remember from the last video, that would kind of look like this. That would be a horizontal line, right? So maybe more accurately, you would have something that looked like this, right? A graph. And then you would have that horizontal line right over here somewhere, okay? Okay, so now let's look at this one. Now, again, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to go x1, y1, x2, y2, and then we're going to substitute it in. M equals negative 2 minus y1, which is 4, over x2, which is 1, minus x1, which is 1. And up on top, we have negative 2 minus 4, which is negative 6 over 0. Now, we cannot ever divide by 0, so we call this undefined. So m equals undefined, and we know from our prior video on the different types of slope that undefined would be a vertical line. But you know, there you go. So anytime you saw a vertical line like that, that's an undefined slope. This is what it looks like with points. It's anytime you get a number over 0, that's like not a possible operation to do in math, so we call that undefined. And that's it. So you need to practice those and be really comfortable with all those different versions of slope and plugging in those points, and just make sure you label them correctly and you'd be good to go. Okay, practice.